Hello, everyone. Today I will be speaking to you about racism and reactions in a story called A Worn Path. As I talk to you about some of the things that go on in this particular story, I'd like to ask you to think as if you were a person in 1941 when the story was published. In this story, the main character is Phoenix Jackson. Like most elderly people, she had her set routine for each day and was determined to make sure her grandson recovered from his illness as fast as possible. However, I did not choose to speak on her dedication. I chose to acknowledge some of the racial slurs and hateful things done towards her. Not everything in the story is necessarily racist, but by the tone of the writer's dialogue, it is slightly easy to see what their real frustration with Phoenix was. In the middle of the story, Phoenix is met by a young white hunter who finds her laying down on the ground, and his initial reaction was laughter when he found her. In no way is this reaction racist, but by him reacting that way, it shows the amount of sympathy he truly had for her. Shortly after he helped her up, they introduced themselves to each other and he began to ask her what her true purpose for being there was. What caught my eye in this part of the story was when he chose to joke and say, "I know you owe colored people." As a young African American man today, it is hard to ignore slurs such as this one. Being called colored in any way is offensive, especially at this point in time in history. And it quickly reminds the black community of times when our race was oppressed. But in this instance, it is even more disrespectful because Phoenix is an elderly black woman who has most likely experienced extreme racism firsthand. The hunter's character not only spoke racial slurs, but also chose to establish his dominance over Phoenix by pointing his gun at her and saying, "Doesn't this gun scare you?" What about Phoenix made him decide to point his gun at her? Was he threatened? Was she speaking to him in a rude manner? What was most intriguing about this situation was that regardless of what he had to say to Phoenix, she showed no reaction and continued on her path. When Phoenix continues her short journey to the hospital, she comes across an attendant that obviously wasn't too fond of her being in front of her. The first thing that the attendant says to her is, "A charity case, I suppose," and then follows with comments like, "Speak up, Grandma," and "Are you deaf?" Now, most people would think that every doctor or nurse's job would be to make their patient feel as comfortable as possible. The unique thing about the whole situation is that Phoenix completely ignored everything they had to say until she finally got what she came for, and that was making her grandson feel better. This story shows how white Americans in the South used to act towards African Americans in the 1940s. But in my opinion, reading this story was meant to also open a reader's eyes to more than just the amount of disrespect and racism that went on, but also how Phoenix handles each situation. Phoenix found a positive in each situation and showed that no matter how you spoke to her, she was not going to be bothered by it and she was going to continue on her path regardless. Racial slurs like these still happen today, but the message I would advise a reader to take out of this is how well Phoenix handled herself throughout each situation. Thank you.